Welcome back, it's Lincoln. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about regaining homeostasis and how that can be challenging in an overstimulated world. Now, I was just outside going on a walk and I was going to film it out there. Then I realized I had one car whizzing by me, another car whizzing by me, another car, and I was like, how am I going to talk about overstimulation as I'm allowing overstimulation to continue happening? So here we are, back in the office. But to start, let's look at this from an evolutionary standpoint. So survival, fight or flight. On an evolutionary level, our bodies are geniusly designed to survive and thrive. Now survive, the most extreme, there's fight or flight. We come into contact with some dangerous situation, our body releases cortisol, all our blood rushes to our outer extremities. We stop doing anything non-essential. We release all extra waste because in that moment, we need everything focused on this immediate situation. Now, the good part is once that situation's over, our body also knows, hey, we're no longer in danger. Let's go back to doing all those non-essential things like processing food and whatever other repairs the body has to do to keep us surviving and thriving. Now, on a still survival level, but a little less immediately intense, let's say starvation. So I'm going to use this experience because as a bodybuilder, I put myself through phases of starvation. When we begin to starve our bodies, we go into survival mode. So this means our body's not going to just keep shedding off weight because it needs weight to live. It needs to hold on to what it can because it doesn't know how long we're going to be at this lower state. So that means it's going to shut down other aspects of our system. So we may become more fatigued. We start losing cognitive function. Our actual core temperature will shut down, so we don't have to put as much energy out to keeping us warm. So I remember when I was bodybuilding, I would get cold all the time. I was also exhausted all the time. I would forget conversations I was having with people mid-conversation. It'll also slow our metabolism. So that means that when we do eat more food, the metabolism is going to be slowed, so it's going to be harder to burn off that weight. So that's why when I would finish a show and I would just start consuming a ton of food, I would shoot up like 20 pounds because my body's like, yes, finally, food. We need to hold on to this. And we actually need to go above and beyond just to be prepared in case we go back through that starvation mode. So this is where we find fallacies in fitness, and one that I followed for years. Just because you're eating at a deficit does not mean you are just losing fat. You're actually putting your body into that mode of starvation, where now it's survival mode, and now it's going to find a way to survive long term, whatever that means. Now, while there's survival, there's also thriving. My buddy Justin just sent me a video yesterday highlighting Dr. Anna Lembke. Now, Dr. Anna Lembke, she is a neuroscientist and she studies the neuroscience of addictions. So what she was saying is the dopamine release, that's a part of our survival instinct as well. We release dopamine when something is good. So just like we release cortisol when something is bad to tell us, hey, don't go back to that situation, we release dopamine when something is good. But that release of dopamine can become addictive. So in the video, she's specifically talking about how video games can become addictive because they are so overstimulating. And then once we are overstimulated, we get, yes, the dopamine. But our body, as it likes to regain homeostasis, once we are done with the video games, it now has to teeter over. And just like how in the diet, where the diet wanted to go above the weight it was at for survival, now the body actually wants to lower. So where there was pleasure, there is now a little more pain to offset the balance. Now, when we hit this low, there's this pain that was once pleasure. We want that pleasure back. So how do we get it? Typically, we go back to the same stimulant that gave it to us before. And this is where, for me personally, I had the cocaine addiction, or I had the bodybuilding addiction, or many of us have probably been addicted to drama in some type of relationship or some type of situation. There's that stimulant, but then when we don't have that stimulant, then there's this lack of like excitement. And what she was saying that as we continue to do more and more of this, we continue to fall further and further over here, and then it's harder to regain that balance. So then when we go to just do any everyday activities, it's just not as exciting because it's not this. So while this activity alone may not be wrong, like video games on their own are not wrong, the overstimulation is going to force an overcorrection. And this is just an evolutionary survival technique. It must balance the pleasure and the pain, the opportunity and tragedy, that combination that we saw in our last existential video. So if we understand that on an evolutionary level, our bodies are just searching to maintain this homeostasis, we'd be doing ourselves a favor to work with the nature of our body to help keep ourselves within this state of homeostasis as often as possible. So that would mean that we recognize to when something is overstimulating us, and we recognize to when, oh, in that situation, cortisol is released and I am now at a higher stress level. And then what can we do to rebalance from one side or the other? Now, on a personal level, I've had multiple situations where I believed I was going to have a child. The first of them was when I was age 20. And of course, stress was an immediate impact. Cortisol was released. My body goes through fight or flight. And now I do take responsibility and I stick around for the first year and a half of the child's life until I find out he's not mine. But what I learned from that experience is I reacted with that cortisol release, not that dopamine release. So this is what I see as a negative. And when I find out the child's not mine, oh, now I have this new opportunity to continue chasing my dreams to do what I want. Now, fast forward, I believe it was 8 years, 7 years, 8 years. And again, I find myself in another situation where I think I'm having a child. And again, the first response, fight or flight, cortisol, stress. What am I going to do? This isn't a time in life when I was ready for a child. But again, I take responsibility, and then unfortunately miscarriage happens. But then there's this release of that stress, this release of that responsibility. So now I've had two situations to where I had this fight or flight. I didn't have this dopamine release. So now a part of me, I understand that the idea of having a kid, all it reminds me of is fight or flight. So it seems stressful to me. I don't see it as this beautiful thing currently because I still feel like I'm not in a position to have a child. Now, this has had an impact on relationships. My ex, Kristen, and I, one of the key reasons why we split was because I knew I wasn't ready for a child in the next few years, and her biological clock was ticking and she really wanted a child. And now, a few years later, I'm still working towards what I want to be working towards, and she has a beautiful baby boy, Hudson. And we can both be appreciative of the fact that I didn't put myself into a situation to where I was going to be highly stressed all the time. And she didn't put herself in a situation to be resentful because she doesn't get this pure joy of having a child. Albert Bandura, in his book Self-Efficacy, writes, through their intentional acts, people shape the functional structure of their neurobiological systems by regulating their own motivation and the activities they pursue. They produce the experiences that form the neurobiological substrate of symbolic, psychomotor, and other skills. So what this is meaning is that we have the intentional choice to restructure our neurobiological systems to gear our lives in the way that we feel and see is best suited. Even Bruce Lipton, in his book Biology Belief, as a biologist, he discovered that outside experiences could influence us down to a DNA level. So what we experience can actually change our DNA. So this means, again, here, by integrating certain aspects into our life, certain habits, we can change the neurobiology that changes our DNA. And as we begin to recognize the benefits of maintaining homeostasis and the risks if we put ourselves into fight or flight to where we're in survival mode, we can start to integrate these techniques and these habits into our life that help us to handle these stressful situations and bring us back into this balanced state a little quicker and a little easier. And hopefully we don't fly off the handle as much or for as long. So I've incorporated habits into my daily life that help me regain and maintain homeostasis. So like for one, meditation, that helps relieve stress. So I do that before I leave the house. That way, if I run into a situation that might strike up fight or flight, I am already in this more settled state to where I can handle that situation better. Also, I try to sleep 8 hours a night because the prefrontal cortex, where we find reasoning and logic, helps balance the amygdala, which is where the release of cortisol and fight or flight comes from. So when we sleep less than 6 hours of night, there's a disconnect, which means that our prefrontal cortex is unable to help balance the amygdala. Another just health reason for trying to sleep 8 hours is Matthew Walker in his book, Why We Sleep, writes that it is no coincidence that countries where sleep has declined most dramatically over the past century are also those suffering the greatest increase in rates in physical disease and mental disorder. So physical disease and mental disorder, again, when we are dealing with those issues, our body is put into a state where it is not at a homeostatic level. Now, diet, as we've already talked about, when we starve ourselves, we put ourselves into survival mode, which means that our body is going to do whatever it can to not only hold on to that weight, but get us back to a place to where we're not starving. I've even programmed in this basic evolutionary need for homeostasis into my training program. I have those 4 weeks of high intensity. And now while the body does crave and require not only that dopamine release, but that need to work at that high level, it also requires the following 2 weeks to rest and to allow the body to re-prepare for those next 4 weeks, because it can't stay at that high intensity state, because if it does, then it's just keeping our body into that state of fight or flight at all the time. Another important element that I've added into my life routine is I take a day where I completely disconnect. I'll shut my phone off. I try to avoid having any type of contact with anyone. I'll do some reading. I'll go on a run. I'll do some stretching. I'll write. I'll do a long meditation. It's just a day where I can disconnect from the outside stimulants and I can just reconnect with myself. And this is one of the most balancing things that I do for myself, because I just give myself that time to slow down and I do regain that homeostasis. And these are some of the times where I have my most incredible ideas. These are the times where I'm able to put out information like this because I've put myself into a state to where I can think clearly and I can think with emotion and with good emotion, where I'm speaking not only from intelligence, from what I've researched, but also from my heart. Now, what works for me doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. So what you have to do is to become in tune with what sets you off, what overstimulates you. Because what overstimulates you might not overstimulate me. But what you need to recognize is, hey, in this situation, I don't respond well to that. And now I have to find a way to regain balance. So what are those things that you can do daily or weekly or monthly that help keep you into this state to where you can maintain progress and maintain performance, and you don't just fall apart into this state of chaos or survival? Now, as we begin to understand the benefits of maintaining homeostasis on an individual level and the risk of being out of balance, now let's take a step up. Let's look at it from a societal level. What are the concerns in society when we don't have this homeostasis? So let's say, okay, maybe we aren't threatened every day with the risk of a tiger attack, but there are things that scare us, like the fear of disease or the fear of loss of job or a breakup. And what does this do? It puts us into fight or flight. Cortisol is released. Our body stops processing food the way it should. We're in survival mode. And if we don't have methods to bring us back, we see things like pandemics like obesity. The country is riddled with obesity. And while we are now preaching that it's, oh, you're just eating too much or you're not exercising enough, a lot of it actually has to do with the fact that our hormones are out of balance. And part of that comes through stress, because two key contributors to weight gain are hormones, insulin and cortisol. And when those hormones are not balanced is where we find weight gain. And this is where we find our obesity problem. It's not just because you're failing at eating too little, because I see so many people, they're on a 12, 13, 1400 calorie diet. And while, yeah, maybe they're getting lean, they're also putting their body into a mode of starvation. And then what happens when they come out of that starvation? The weight gain comes back. And that is what we're seeing on a societal level, is people are trying all these tips and tricks that they hear and they read. And this lack of education is creating problems of obesity. We are at the most advanced state of scientific knowledge, medicine, technology. And while all that is continuing to grow and expand and society as a whole is getting better, we see that the physical and the mental conditions of the population within society is on a decline. So while all this great things are happening, why is there this offset balance? There has to be something that is causing this. So we find by a combination of fear and overstimulation, our bodies are put into this state of fight or flight. And our bodies don't necessarily recognize we need to be out of this state of fight or flight. And we are not creating the balance necessary to bring our bodies back to homeostasis. Because while our body will do as much as it can on its own, if we continue to keep putting ourselves into these situations, it'll be impossible. And that is why we have these societal issues. And that also plays into the role of divide. Okay, so we also saw that when sleep is off, your ability to reason isn't there. That means that you're confronted with the situation and the first thing you want to do, fight or flight. Some of us want to fight, so we snap off on that next person on social media. And this person has the vaccine and that person doesn't, and now they hate each other. This person's a Democrat, this person's a Republican, and now they hate each other. And we have all this animosity and we have all this divide. And a part of it just comes down to the fact that at an evolutionary level, we are just trying to survive, but also we're trying to thrive. But how do we thrive? When we are unable to regain this homeostasis. So now let's have a little fun. Let's look at this on a global scale. This is going to be a little more philosophical. This is going to be a little more about the interconnectedness of all energies and all aspects of life. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with my good friend Bryce, and I'm actually going to get him on here to have a conversation at some point, do like a podcast type, because we always have these great conversations. But the discussion was about how people are saying that Elon Musk should give money to help these starving people. But maybe Elon Musk recognizes that there is this lack of homeostasis within the world. Because what is his mission? His mission is to get humanity to Mars. And why is that? Like we see on an individual evolutionary level, our body has this natural ability to regulate itself. Even when we're trying to be in control, our biology is going to be like, no, you are trying to kill us and we're not going to allow you to do it. So now looking at that on the global scale, let's actually reference the Bible. Revelation 18:8 talks about fire and floods and disease and starvation and how it's plaguing the earth and how God is like sending his vengeance. But do you really think it's God sending his vengeance? Or maybe God is this like interconnectedness of the universe, and we have actually as humans done so much damage and used so many resources that it is just trying to get back to this homeostatic state. So what is it trying to do? It's trying to destroy the disease. And if the disease is humans, then that means that to balance out the world, it has to send disease. It has to send fire and flood and famine. And maybe the famine comes from we've used all the resources. And now there's no longer resources to feed the population. So now if we look at Elon Musk, he's just this guy, he just wants humanity to survive. He's like, I would feed those starving people, but hey, we're all gonna die if we don't make it there. So as we reverse engineer this down to our very DNA, we go back to that individual cell. And in Dr. Bruce Lipton's book, Biology of Belief, he talks about how that individual cell then works within a unit. And then that unit expands to a bigger unit. And all these units end up being one human body and one human being. So if we are a bunch of these single cell organisms, and as we have the understanding now that we have the ability to influence our neurobiological systems, we know that we can influence that cell, which can in turn influence the unit, so we can influence ourselves. Then maybe we can work together as a unit. And then as society, we can grow and work together as a unit. And that just continues to expand and expand and expand. And there we have it. So thank you guys for taking this journey with me from that single cell level organism all the way to an explosive universe. Please comment any thoughts below, like, subscribe. And if you feel like this video would serve someone well, please share. Thank you. Have a blessed week.